Welcome back to Jen's Recaps. Today, I'm going to recap a supernatural movie about a group of undead cops that capture souls and send them back to hell. With that, let the movie begin. After stopping a group of criminals in an operation, Agent Nick Walker seizes a large amount of gold. However, along with his partner Bobby Hayes, Nick decides to keep his own share of the gold underground, burying his half under an orange tree in the backyard. The next morning, Nick is woken up by his wife, Julia, who asks about the new plant in their garden. But since he doesn't want the girl to find out what he has under the plant, the policeman pretends not to know anything and tries to change the subject. While they talk, the man starts to ask his wife about the future and says that he doesn't want to have to worry about money anymore. But Julia replies that she doesn't care about money and that the only thing she needs is her husband by her side. Moved by what she says, Nick goes to work and tells Bobby that he intends to hand over his share of the gold as evidence. But thinking this is motivated by fear, Hayes offers to be in charge of the sale. Still, Nick stands his ground and says that he doesn't want to let Julia down, yet he knows that his partner has nothing to do with it and says that Bobby can do whatever he wants with his share. Moved by his friend's determination, Hayes decides that he will also return in his half. But before they can even do that, another officer shows up saying that they have found the location of Garza, a major illicit substance trader who has been on the run for months. On the way to the safe house, Nick sees a strange bracelet on Bobby's arms and decides to ask about the object, but Hayes says it is just an old medal from his grandmother. After the long journey, they finally arrive at their destination and break into the laboratory, where they begin an intense exchange of fire with the criminals. While everyone is distracted, Nick sees Garza climbing a ladder and decides to go after him. But when he gets upstairs, he realizes that the criminal has already escaped through the window. At that moment, Bobby comes out of the back door and says he can't let him return the gold, shooting his best friend and causing him to plummet to his death. As soon as he hits the ground, Nick opens his eyes and realizes that time has stopped. But before he can even understand what is happening, a large portal opens in the sky, and he begins to be pulled into what appears to be a celestial interrogation room. There, the inspector explains that he is into the afterlife, but thanks to his 15 years of experience as a policeman on Earth, he is being summoned to the Rest in Peace Department, responsible for capturing the souls that managed to escape the trial of God and sending them to the underworld. At first, Nick doesn't seem very interested in joining the RIPD. But he quickly changes his mind after finding out that he will return to Earth if he agrees to join the corporation. Seeing the officer's excitement, the inspector explains that he won't be able to get his life back, and Nick pretends not to care, asking them to start the work soon. At that point, a badge is branded on his chest, and the inspector begins to introduce the RIPD headquarters. However, during the tour, one of the dead gets out of hand and tries to escape, only to be easily eliminated by veteran Roy Pulsifer, who will be Nick's new partner, and to the inspector's request. The cowboy takes his new colleague back to Earth, and together they go to visit the rookie's funeral. But instead of respecting the rules of the corporation and staying away, Nick sees Julia leaving and decides to go after her. Only for the girl, he doesn't have the same appearance or voice as when he was alive, so she doesn't recognize him and asks the other cops for help, causing Nick to be arrested while Bobby leaves the scene next to Julia. After being released. If you feel like watching this movie someday, the title is in the comments. The rookie goes to Roy. The man explains to him that he now has a new identity and hands him the documents. His name will be Jerry Chun, an elderly Asian man. Outraged, Nick begins to complain about his appearance until his partner also reveals his documents, showing that to the living, he looks like a supermodel who attracts stares wherever he goes. After the wake, they received several reports and head to a building where they suspect there is a dead man hiding. To track down the fugitive, Roy grabs a bag of Indian food from the trunk and starts following the signs of rot. Because according to him, the souls of the deceased are so toxic that they can corrode everything around them, causing plants to die out and objects to break. Following these signs, they reach an apartment on the 30th floor that has a totally rotten entrance. Almost certain that the deceased is inside, Roy knocks on the door, saying that they're from the health department and that they are there to check if the apartment owner is still alive. Even with this strange excuse, the man let them in, and Nick starts to ask some questions while his partner eats the entire lunchbox of Indian food. But because of the cumin, the villager begins to feel sick and ends up transforming, revealing his grotesque appearance of a dead man. With confirmation that the suspect is indeed a fugitive, Roy orders Nick to arrest him. But while the rookie is putting on the handcuffs, the dead man takes the opportunity to rip the refrigerator door off and throws it at them, both grabbing a carton of milk from inside and preparing to flee. Nick holds the dead man to try to stop him. However, the weird creature hooks the other part of the handcuff onto the policeman and rips off his own arm. The monster grabs the milk crate and starts running while swallowing some gold plates that were inside, jumping off the building and falling face first onto the asphalt. However, the dead mutant still manages to get up. If you feel like watching this movie someday, the title is in the comments, and gets ready to run. To prevent him from escaping, Roy comes all the way down the hall and jumps off the building along with Nick, causing the rookie to absorb all the damage as they fall on top of the creature. On the ground, the corpse starts laughing at Nick's face, who attacks him and starts beating him with all his might, causing the creature to spit out all the gold it had swallowed. As soon as Walker sees the signs, he remembers that this is exactly why Bobby eliminated him and bends down to watch closely, giving the monster a gap to attack. But at the last second, he is saved by Roy, who hits a beautiful headshot on the monster. With the operation completed, the cowboy begins to report and evaluate Nick's performance, who doesn't even pay attention since he is busier trying to understand the relationship between Bobby, the dead, and the gold plates. But since his partner will not shut up, the rookie gets tired and decides to throw Roy in front of a bus, causing him to crash into the glass and lose his hat. When they return to the RIPD, Nick says that he finds the deceased's determination to protect the gold strange and asks them to continue investigating. However, his partner says that it is just some kind of offering and that they should not worry about it. Still, Nick remains intrigued and manages to convince Roy to take him to an informant so they can find out more about the origin of this gold. With this in mind, they go to the city stadium, where they meet a deceased man named Elliot, who is addicted to baseball and has agreed to become Roy's informant, just to be able to keep watching the games below the bleachers. Nick shows Elliot the piece of gold and reveals that another dead man was eliminated trying to protect it. But as soon as he sees the object in his partner's hands, Roy interrupts the conversation and accuses him of illegally taking evidence. Still, Nick doesn't seem to mind and decides to continue the interrogation, asking once again what the creature knows about that object. Quite ironic, Elliot refuses to answer and begins to ridicule Nick's funeral, who takes one of the metal pieces from the scoreboard and hits the dead man in the head with all his might. After the beating, Elliot decides to start cooperating and asks to have the gold piece analyzed. But after some investigation, he comes to the conclusion that it must be some kind of talisman, since he has not heard anything about this object on the streets. With the interrogation concluded, Nick hands the gold to the deceased and asks him to keep an eye on it while he is away. But instead of leaving, the policemen go back to their car and keep a lookout for any movement from Elliot, which doesn't take long to happen. Figuring the cops are gone, the dead man leaves the stadium and hands the piece of gold to Bobby, leaving the pair of officers curious as to what Hayes is up to. To find this out, the cowboy begins to follow him to Julia's house, where the trader asks her if she has noticed anything strange and reveals that his ex-partner has hidden something in the backyard. Digging up the gold pieces under the orange tree, upon seeing what her husband had hidden, Julia is frightened into thinking that Nick was a crook and asks Bobby to take the oars to the police station. As soon as he sees the gold in the yard, Roy points his gun at his partner's head and asks where he got it, forcing Nick to tell him about the seizure they made and that he intended to keep the pieces to change his life. At this point, they realize that Bobby is getting away with the metal plates, and they pursue him again, arriving at a gallery where Hayes delivers a suitcase with all the gold to the receiver. As soon as his former partner leaves, Nick decides to take the criminal to the meat locker and starts asking about the parts while growing human on his own hand. But to their misfortune, this dead man says he is tired of hiding and dips his own face into the spice, beginning his bizarre transformation. Completely insane, the fat guy escapes by breaking down the refrigerator door and goes straight to the streets, scaring everyone with his gruesome appearance. Outside, the deceased jumps out of a truck and starts climbing the building like a mixture of Spider-Man and the Kingpin, forcing Roy to shoot him with his grappling hook to try to hold him back. But thanks to his massive strength, the fat guy manages to drag the cowboy through the buildings, causing a gigantic traffic jam and getting Nick crushed by one of the cars. As soon as he gets up, the officer again pursues the dead man, who continues to drag Roy through the buildings. But when the vicious creature breaks through the glass and enters one of the buildings, Nick is forced to run to try to save his partner from the inside. The receiver breaks down the elevator doors and jumps into the pit to try to escape. However, the rookie is already on the first floor and starts shooting at the hydraulic cables, causing the metal box to rise at a frightening speed, shattering the ceiling and flying through the air. After falling on the terrace, Nick gets out of the elevator with the suitcase and saves Roy, who is hanging outside the building, while the deceased runs away through the streets in front of the entire population. After this massive failure, they return to the RIPD, where the inspector takes them to Eternal Affairs, a kind of heavenly HR. There, the higher beings send a telegram explaining that the gold they have seized is part of an ancient mystical artifact called the Rod of Jericho, which is capable of reversing the tunnel to the afterlife and literally making the dead rain down to earth. Now that they know about the deceased plans, the Celestials go on red alert and decide to put all their best men to recover the parts of the artifact. But because of the failure in the gallery, the two officers are expelled from the corporation and sentenced. If you feel like watching this movie someday, the title is in the comments. To be erased. The next morning, with only one day left, Nick leaves the RIPD and goes straight to a racetrack where Julia usually trains. In this place, the policeman approaches his wife and touches her, causing her to get carried away and feel as if he were her husband. But when she opens her eyes, Julia realizes that it is only the old man from the wake and runs away in despair, thinking that Nick is some kind of psychotic old man from the bleachers. Roy warns that the boy is definitely haunting his wife, causing his partner to walk away and decide to leave Julia alone. Still, he refuses to stand by while the apocalypse happens, say it was time for the duo to act. Still not knowing where to start, Nick suggests that Hayes is one of the leaders of the dead and is with the gold at home. But before they leave, he wonders how he never noticed the rod, and Roy says that some of these creatures can camouflage themselves with the help of artifacts. In Bobby's case, it was that metal he carried on his wrist. Simultaneously, Hayes meets with another deceased and hands him a mysterious sphere split in half, asking him to go and make trouble and get arrested. The next morning, Julia calls Bobby and tells him about what happened at the racetrack, saying that she is pretty sure that that old man is Nick trying to communicate with her. At this moment, the pair of policemen park in front of Hayes' house, and he asks the woman to forget the matter. The man hangs up the phone and then takes the other half of the sphere to receive his visitors. Outside, Nick hides and goes to the back, while Roy knocks on the door, trying to seduce the deceased. But since he already knows who they are, Bobby offers the supposed woman a drink and goes to the kitchen, where he plans to get his gun. However, as soon as Hayes enters the room, Nick appears behind him and surrenders him with his own rifle, asking Bobby to take off his medal. As soon as he does this, the whole house begins to crack and splits in half, spreading the smell of rot through the air and revealing the remaining gold that was hidden in the heater. Now that they have everything they want, the two cops go back to the car together with the prisoner, who strangely enough can't stop smiling and making jokes all the way. At the RIPD headquarters, Roy finds the other half of the orb in Bobby's pockets and decides to turn it in as evidence. A very bad idea, since this was an evil plan all along. As the two halves of the artifact approach each other, they begin to attract each other until they perfectly match, releasing a powerful wave that sends everything into slow motion. Because they have limited adhering, the deceased are unaffected by the frequency and are able to move around freely, going straight to the evidence room and stealing all the gold needed to build the Staff of Jericho. Even in slow motion, Roy manages to aim his gun at the artifact and hit a shot that separates the sphere again, causing everything to return to normal and giving Nick a chance to hit Bobby. But he is not fast enough, and the deceased manage to return to Earth with the gold. Now that they have all the necessary pieces, the monsters start assembling the Jericho staff on top of the building, while the others stay on the ground, exchanging shots with the RIPD agents. Suddenly, one of the deceased appears with a minigun and starts shooting in the direction of the policemen, forcing them to take cover. But his gun locks up, which gives Roy the chance to prepare to duel and eliminate the two remaining enemies with a single shot. At this point, the deceased are finishing building the staff, and Hayes asks some of them to go and get Julia because he intends to use her blood to activate the artifact. At the same time, several tornadoes appear in the sky and start sucking up everything they can, causing the portal to the afterlife to appear right on top of the Boston Nations building. As soon as he sees this, gets in his car and starts driving through the streets, but the dead ones are determined to eliminate them and start chasing the cops, while the tornadoes reverse themselves and give back everything they sucked right on top of them. Because of his experience with chases, Nick is able to dodge the projectiles and eliminate his enemies. But the deceased are engaged in the chase and block the main road, forcing the police duo to jump through the barricade, striking the deceased in front of them. Still, Hayes' contact is still attached to the hood, and Nick accelerates full speed towards a building, smashing the legs of the deceased and eliminating him with 3 headshots. Shortly thereafter, at the same time, Julia finally arrives at the Nations building, and Bobby decides to inhale cumin in front of her, revealing his true form and taking her to the top of the building. In the air, a broadcasting company's helicopter encounters the deceased on top of the building, and they begin to broadcast the images live. But one of the creatures hurls a backhoe toward the aircraft, causing it to fall to the ground and the machine to plummet to the top of the building, just above the staff of Jericho. At this point, Hayes finally finishes assembling the artifact and tells Julia about having to use her blood to activate the object. But at that moment, Nick and Roy finally arrive at the building, and Bobby is forced to shove a steel rod into the woman's ribs, causing her blood to be slowly drained by the rod. Furious, Nick starts shooting all the dead people on the roof. But because of the large number of enemies, he decides to split up and go save Julia while Roy deactivates the staff, which at this point is finishing reversing the path to the afterlife and bringing the dead back to Earth. After eliminating countless dead bodies, Nick finally comes face to face with Bobby. But as his gun runs out of ammunition, he goes toe-to-toe with his former partner. Even though he is a trained cop, the dead are still stronger. As a result, Nick gets the worst of it and has his head smashed against a rock, while Roy tries unsuccessfully to dismantle the artifact. Realizing that physical force will not help, the cowboy decides to change his approach and prepares a lasso with the steel cables, managing to hook the backhoe and drop it right on top of the artifact, causing the object to disassemble and the tunnel to the afterlife to return to its normal direction. To put an end to this once and for all, Nick picks up a revolver from the floor and fires a shot right into Bobby's forehead, ending his former partner forever. Without further ado, Nick goes to Julia and gives her one last kiss goodbye, telling her that she must move on and live her life without him from now on, causing the girl to faint and wake up in a hospital bed. With things finally at peace, the inspector goes to the police duo and reveals that the Eternal Subjects have decided to revoke their expulsion, as well as return Roy's favorite hat. Finally, the cowboy says he has a surprise for his partner and reveals that he got Nick new identities, since he hated being an old Chinese man. But because of the lack of options, Roy ended up getting the appearance of a teenager with huge braces, leaving Nick to be a little red-headed girl for the rest of eternity. So, what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below, and if you